I've been running the Cool Infographics site since 2007, where we highlight the best infographic and data visualization designs we can find, really meant to be inspiration for anyone to visualize your own data differently and in a more fun and engaging way. Cool Infographics is also the name of my book that came out 2 years ago, and it's going to cover most of what we're talking about today, plus a whole lot more. It goes into a whole lot more detail in other ways of different types of infographics and how to post and share infographics and design tools and stuff like that. Feel free to tweet. I know a lot of my audiences like to tweet. You can include my username at RTKrum in Twitter, or follow me online. I post quite often on Twitter, and that's usually the main avenue for social media for me. And then InfoNewt is my company. And so at InfoNewt, about half of what we do are what you see online, the public marketing infographics that companies release and publish and then share in social media. But really, the other half of what we do is designing data visualizations and infographics for internal use by corporations. So companies have tons and tons of confidential information that they want to do a better job sharing internal and making good business decisions. So we help them design graphics for presentations or posters, handouts, whether it's a sales meeting or employee training or a board meeting. And so we do a bunch of designs that way too. And so everything we talk about today is kind of leaning towards the public social media infographic side, but a lot of it also applies to any presentation design or any charts you're designing, even for internal use. So let's go through a couple basics right before we jump into the tips. Number one, the human brain is the best pattern recognition machine on the planet. Computers are not yet as good as we are at seeing a shape or an image or a pattern or a trend and being able to identify not only that it exists, but identify what it is and what its meaning is. So in very basic terms, you can see this image of a lion hiding in the grass. And within nanoseconds, I mean, very quickly, not only do you recognize what it is, but you understand that if you're seeing this, your life is in danger. And you need to run or climb a tree or whatever you need to do to survive. And you can do that almost instantly. And we want to tap into that as designers. Also, we are primarily visual creatures. This study that I reference here is that says that 80% of the brain is dedicated to processing visual information. I've seen studies anywhere between 60% and 90%. And really that we rely on our sight, we have spatial sense, we have our visual memory. All these things that we have have evolved to make us this fabulous visual creature. And then the third thing is what's called the picture superiority effect. If you haven't heard this before, what this tells us is that if I just tell you something and you just hear me speaking, or you're reading text, like a text explanation of something, that 3 days later you are likely to only remember 10% of that information. But if I can tie that information to a visual and get it into the visual part of your brain and your visual memory, whether it's with a chart or a photo or an icon or an illustration, if I can get that information into a visual form, 3 days later, now you are likely to remember up to 65% of that information, which is a huge deal. It's a huge difference when you're talking about marketing information or training information or information you're trying to share that you want people to make decisions upon. Now, I do need to make a distinction. We're surrounded by visual information, whether it's street signs or newspapers or posters or infographics online. I don't consider all these to be infographics. And so for purposes today, and I do this in the book as well, so I make the distinction that this is a chart. This is what I call a data visualization, right? And so it is simply a visual representation of the data. There are about 80,000 data points here being shown from the stock market indices in the US over what looks like the last 65 years. And so this is just a data visualization. We as designers need to be good at designing data visualizations because we then use those in a bigger design that we call an infographic. So in my definition, an infographic is actually this larger image that tells a story, and it uses data visualizations. I think there are 25 different data visualizations within this one infographic. And it combines those with text, with icons and illustrations, and a well-planned layout to tell a story. And all this together is what we call an infographic. And so we need to be good at designing data visualizations, and we use data visualizations in the building and design of infographics. And our goal is, a good infographic should be, easy to read for your audience, and something that's going to take information and make it quickly understandable, make it memorable, and ideally make it actionable for your audience. So it's something that they can understand a complex concept or a complex data set that you've been able to simplify with a chart or with an explanation or with some visuals. It makes it memorable to them so that they can then remember it and make decisions and ideally act upon it. The last thing to remember is that infographics, just the word infographic, continues to grow in popularity. This is Google Trends, and what this charts, they've normalized the values between 0 and 100, but what it shows you is the amount of searches being entered into Google using the word infographic, and you can see it has exploded in the last 3 years of people who are out there, and every time they look for something, they're actually looking for an infographic about a topic. I've talked to schools where students are searching for infographics before they go to Wikipedia to do research that they've been assigned to do or something like that. And if you go back, and like I mentioned before, I started the Cool Infographics site back in 2007, and you can see on this chart, it's not even a blip. Just the idea of people going out and looking for information in an infographic form has exploded so much that 2007 is not even a green dot on this chart. So let's dive in. I want to run through 10 tips today for designing infographics. And the idea here, as Payman mentioned earlier, is that it doesn't matter what platform you design infographics with. If you have desktop software like Illustrator, if you're using online software like Visme, which is a fabulous tool, or I know some people are even using photographs to create visual information, like this little pie chart here is a breakdown of the different most popular flavors of Girl Scout cookies, and they broke up the Girl Scout cookies to make this pie chart and just took a photo of it to make their graphic. It doesn't matter which style or method you're going to use. These 10 tips are going to help you design a better infographic that's going to be more memorable and easier for your audience to understand, and certainly help build your credibility in your online presence. So number one, and in my word, the most important tip that I can give you is that you need your data visualizations in your infographic to be visually accurate. Accuracy is so important. If you mess up, and what I mean by this, let me show you. So what I mean by this is the visuals need to match the data. So in this case, that donut chart does not show 80%, and the yellow one does not show 20%. So the visuals don't match the data. And all the good things about infographics, about being more memorable and quicker to understand, will all work against you if your data visualizations, if your charts don't match your data, because now you've hurt your credibility, and because you've made it visual and you've made it public, everybody's going to remember that you were unable to make a chart that actually matched your data and really kill your credibility, and they're going to be more likely to remember that you messed it up. Here's another example. For some reason, pie charts are just really tough. In this case, pie charts have to add up to 100%. But in this case, they took data that really had no business being in a pie chart and forced it in. This should have been a bar chart that showed these three multiple choice answers. But you're really, you see this, I see this all the time. But once you start looking for it, you're going to see a lot of cases where people will visualize data in a news article or in an infographic where the visual itself doesn't match the data. You're going to see it quite often. And it's generally an honest mistake. Here's an example from Nielsen showing smartphone market share, where this is called a tree map, and each rectangle is meant to represent the values, the percentage of market share in this case, where the entire rectangle, all of them together, should add up to 100%. But you can see in the middle that Apple and BlackBerry are pretty similar sized rectangles, but they shouldn't be. So 34% is nowhere near 9%. And so Nielsen, a couple weeks later, had to post this corrected version, and you can see it's dramatically different from what that original version looked like. And so it really, really is important that you get your accuracy. And generally what happens, and I call these false visualizations, and generally what happens is you're using your design tool and you're using it manually and you're trying to force your data into a specific visual style, but you as the designer don't understand that you have to go do some math beforehand. So for example, this is a very popular infographic in the last year that was showing the difference between, on the left side, how much money is raised by a number of these charities fighting different diseases, and the size of each circle is supposed to represent how much money they've raised. And on the right side, the circle will show how many people have died based on those diseases that the charities are trying to raise money to fight. And in this case, the data is correct, but the circles don't match the data. In fact, I redesigned it to show what the circles should be sized as. And of course, they are in descending order, so you do still see the difference between the charities raising money and how many people are dying from that disease. But it's nowhere near as extreme as what the original design from Vox Media was. And the reason is that when we see shapes on a screen or on a piece of paper, we're looking at a two-dimensional object, but in many cases, our data is only one-dimensional. And so you have to adjust the area of whatever shape you're sizing to make it match the data. So in this case, the correct version, right, I'm trying to show one circle that's 3 times as large as the first circle. And to do that, you have to calculate the area of the first circle, triple that area, and then back into what that diameter should be. But what happens is in design software, when you draw a circle, you have only control over width and height. You don't have a field where you can enter the area number. And so if you triple the diameter, which would be the width of a circle, you actually end up making a circle that's 9 times larger. Basically, it's the square of the diameter, and so you have a problem showing sizes of icons or shapes or images or logos, whatever it is you're sizing to match your data. You actually have to calculate the area. All right, so tip number 2 is to be focused. You want to tell one story really well with an infographic. You want to communicate your message pretty quickly and cleanly, and then move on. You don't want to try to tell 10 different stories all in one infographic. You're not going to keep your audience's attention that long. Online, I have what I call the 5-second rule. And from the millions and millions of views that we've had on the Cool Infographics site over the last 10 years, most people are only going to look at an infographic for somewhere between 5 and 10 seconds. And so as designers, knowing this, we want to be able to communicate our main message in that first 5 seconds, so that even if they move on and don't read the whole infographic, they still walk away understanding what our primary message was. And so we ask this question at the very beginning of a design process, which says, what's that one message? What's that one piece of information? What's that one insight from the data? What is it that you're trying to communicate and you want the audience to remember? And that the rest of the design should focus on making sure we communicate that within the first 5 seconds. This example on the screen of where is Google making its money starts with 97% of Google's revenue comes from advertising, and then has this large pie chart showing the top 20 most expensive keywords in Google AdWords advertising platform. And you very quickly understand that the key message is Google's just making their money from advertising. You can dig into the details and the top 20 keywords, but you really don't need to know that number 6 is lawyer and number 9 or 8 is degree. Those details are there for the smaller part of your audience that wants to dig into all those details. But if your audience skips over that and just realizes, okay, Google's making their money from advertising, and then they move on to something else on the web, missing success because you have communicated your key message in that first 5 seconds. What you don't want to do, and this is what I call a big pile of data, is try to design everything you know all into one infographic. This is an infographic about Salesforce, the company, and talks about their sales growth and talks about their acquisitions and their strategic partners and all their different app categories and their global footprint and all their company acquisitions over the years. And it's really just everything they could think of thrown into one infographic. And you and the audience, you don't know where to start. There's no story, there's no flow. We all may look at different things, so there's no key message here that's being communicated. You also see something like this, which is just a mass of logos that are thrown into these buckets. And this was all put together. There's no title, There's no story. It's just a visual that went along with an article, but gets shared all by itself without the article, and really becomes a problem because it was not put together with some nice format and trying to tell a clean story. In general, when we look at infographics online, we want to tell a three-part story. We want to start with an introduction, some sort of foundational information. What kind of data or information does your audience need to understand before you share your main point, right? And so your main point ought to be that aha moment, that insight that's revealed to the audience, and that needs to be your key message. That needs to be also the visual focus of your infographic design, so that that's what draws their attention. And then you want to finish it with some sort of call to action or conclusion. What is it you want your audience to do with this information you've just revealed to them? It might be eat healthier, vote a certain way, buy a product, call your mother. You really need to give your audience some sort of direction as to what is it you want them to do. So here's an example. This one's called The Tower of Beer. It starts with Tom investing $1 a day at the age of 25, and then by the age of 70, he has amassed this immense retirement fund because he's been investing for so long that he can afford this giant tower of beer. Visually, we compare that to, on the left, that looks really teeny tiny, the Statue of Liberty. And in the middle, we have the tallest tower in the world in Dubai. And on the right, this massive tower of cases of beer that Tom can now afford, just to visually show how much money can be saved in his retirement fund. The conclusion doesn't have to be a heavy sales pitch. In this case, it's just learn more at rothira.com. It gives the audience something to do, somewhere to go, now that you've revealed this new information to them. We start with, knowing that key message. We want to map out a clear flow of information within an infographic. So we will always start with an information wireframe. We will block out what information we're going to share so that we make sure that we're communicating the main message, and any other data or visuals or graphics that we include in an infographic is going to be supporting that main message. And we do that before we start creating any of the design aspects or design elements themselves. Number 3 is to be visual. Certainly you want to visualize your information. That doesn't always mean charts, but you definitely want to make sure that you visualize your information. That's what's going to tie into the visual part of your audience's brain. For example, here's an infographic that does it all in text. So all these are showing how many active users are in each of the major social media platforms, from Facebook at almost 1.4 billion down to Pinterest at 70 million and Vine at 40 million. They're all sized the same font, the same size rectangle. To you, the audience, there's no visual difference. You actually have to read and then remember the differences in values and do that comparison in your head, where if we had designed this visually, we could visually show you the difference and it would be a whole lot easier for you to understand. And it's so when you visualize data and you're creating a chart or anything else, you need to understand that you can't visualize a number all by itself. Visualizing means you're going to take multiple data points and you're going to compare them so that your audience can see the differences. You're either going to compare them amongst each other, a percentage is compared to 100%, or you might be comparing it to something that the audience is already familiar with. That gives them some context and puts your data into context for the audience. If you don't put your data into context or visualize it in comparison to something, your audience is going to try to do that on their own, and you have no control over that. You don't know what they're going to compare your data to. You don't know how they're going to share it. So if I tell you, for example, that there are approximately 3 billion global internet users, and I put it in a really big, bold font, you don't really have any understanding of that data. I haven't provided any context for that data, other than that data point is our main point. And I tell audiences and designers often that big fonts are not data visualizations. Just making your numbers big does not help your audience understand that information. You've still got to provide that context. You also can't visualize a number all by itself in a chart. So a bar chart that only has one bar of almost 3 billion global internet users still doesn't give you any context. You have no frame of reference. You don't know, is this a big number? Is this a small number? Is this a growing number or a shrinking number? You don't have any feel for what does this number mean, and you're going to decide yourself as an individual reader or member of the audience if you think 3 billion is big or small. depending on your own frame of reference. So as a designer, what we want to do is we want to give it some comparison. In this case, I'm comparing the 3 billion global internet users to the over 7 billion total population, total number of people on the planet Earth, right? And so now this 3 billion global internet users is a little over a third, but not quite half, right? So we have a lot of people on the internet, but we're not even halfway there. We have a long way to go. And so by comparing it to a larger number, I create a frame of reference which says, okay, that 3 billion is big, but we got a long way to go. If I choose a different number to compare to, so this is the same 3 billion global internet users, which is the large blue circle, compared to the smaller circle with the US flag that shows the size of the total population of the US, which is 320 million. So that's more than 9, almost 10 times every man, woman, and child in the US. Now that creates a very different frame of reference and a very different context. That's a lot of internet users compared to the total population of the US. And so you, as the designer, you have to very carefully choose which numbers you're going to include in your infographic or in a specific data visualization to provide the right context. You want to convey the information and help your audience understand what is the impact, what is the meaning behind that information. Number 4, eliminate chart legends. Chart legends are that color key that most charting tools will create automatically. And in most cases, as the designer, you could eliminate that and move that data actually into the chart itself. The challenge is that when you have that chart legend on the side, and here's a really, really bad example. Please don't ever design a chart like this. Give it, this chart legend over to the right side of your chart. Your audience is going to look back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it makes it much more difficult for your audience to actually understand what's going on in the data visualization design. Much more simply, this is the default chart that Excel or PowerPoint would create. It's just a bar chart. This is showing the population by age group, by category, Gen X, baby boomers, Gen Y, and Gen Z. And it automatically creates that color key, that legend over on the right side. And you've got to look back and forth, say, what does blue mean? What does green mean? What does purple mean? And it's that much harder for your audience to understand. But you as the designer, no matter what tool you're using, can eliminate that chart legend over on the side and move that information into the chart. So in this case, I've put underneath all the bars the names of all the age groups in the US and had a little fun by just putting some icons on top of the bar chart to show the different age groups. By doing this, it puts all the information in what's called one field of view. So your audience is looking at the chart and they don't have to look to the side to understand what it is. It's very easy to look down or look at the icon to see very quickly what's going on with this infographic or in this chart. Now, number 5, this is connected, is to be blatant. And that means don't try to be too subtle in your design. You're trying to communicate information very quickly in a very concise manner. And so even in your charts, you want to make it obvious which data you're talking about and which data you really want your audience to focus on. So in this case, we'll look back at the same chart of the age generations, where in this case, all the bars are colored. And unless you know the title and the context and everything else, you really don't know what I'm talking about. This just gives you an overview of all the age groups. But it's very simple to gray out the ones I'm not talking about. So here's the same chart. We've eliminated the color key on the side, but now I've taken the last 4 bars and grayed them out so that the first bar is the one that's blue, and that's what's going to attract your attention, because color is going to attract your attention. And in this case, it's obvious that Gen Z is the age group that now I'm talking about. And your audience can see that, again, talking about being a pattern recognition machine, you can see that in a fraction of a second and then move on to the next set of data. And that just helps your audience move that much faster through your information, whether it's a presentation or an infographic. Number 6 is be engaging. So no matter what your design, your audience is going to look at it from a distance, whether it's in a tweet or a blog post, maybe a post on Facebook, somewhere else. And then they're going to have to make that decision. Do I really want to go spend the time looking through this infographic and learning this information? And in this case, the first thing they're going to look at is your title. And you need to have a title that generally, this becomes an exercise like writing headlines for newspaper articles, you want something that is catchy, something that is engaging and interesting to your audience. But specifically, you want it to make sure that your title tells your audience what they're about to learn in the infographic. So you want to be pretty quick about this is what this infographic is about, and you know what you're getting into if you're going to dive deep into this infographic. I'll show you the second example where there's no title whatsoever. And so it's really important to understand that when you release an infographic online, whether it's all by itself or a data visualization that's posted into a blog post or a news article or something like that, that the image is going to be grabbed. This JPEG file is going to be grabbed by people and shared all by itself without all the context of the article that you published it with or any other text you had surrounding it. And so you need to include things like that title in the image itself so that no matter who shares it, that title goes along with it and becomes this entity all by itself and can live without all that extra text you may have posted along with it in the first place. Number 7 is to be transparent. And what I mean by that is to be data transparent. Be very obvious and upfront about where you're getting your information. Is this a survey that your company did? Is this a report that's publicly available that you're pulling information from? Is this, might even be your own website statistics that you're creating a design about? But you really need to very quickly make it obvious where your data is coming from so that your audience has a reason to believe you and can move on past skepticism to actually listening to your message. So here's an example of what can hurt you quite a bit. So the White House has been putting out infographics now for a couple years on the White House blog. This is one that came out, I believe, in 2013 about the Obama energy agenda, and has a whole bunch of statistics about our reliance on oil and alternate energy sources and future projections of energy needs. But they don't have any data sources cited in this infographic at all. Nobody knows where these numbers came from. And so when people were posting and sharing and talking through comments about this infographic online, all the conversation was about where are these numbers coming from. These aren't numbers I've ever seen before. Did they make these numbers up? I have completely different data. I've never seen this data before. And so it really became an exercise in people being skeptical about data and not actually talking about the Obama energy agenda. So you really have to be upfront and honest about where your data is coming from, and if it's your own survey or an outside survey. Now, we all love Wikipedia. Don't use Wikipedia as your data source unless you're doing a 4th grade report. So at the bottom of every Wikipedia page are the sources and references of all the statistics and data and information included in a Wikipedia article. You may find some great stuff in Wikipedia, but go to the original source. Not only cite the original source if you want to quote that data, but go there and make sure that that data actually says what you think it does, because many times it has been over-summarized or oversimplified in a Wikipedia article. And one other thing, this is just more of a less important but interesting, important note, which is don't obscure your data sources. So a lot of infographics will just list the organization or the homepage of where their data came from, the UN, the World Bank, or data.gov, but not actually tell you what report that data came from. And it makes you, the user or the reader, have to go to that site and then start doing searches to see if you can figure out, this puzzle of where did these people come up with this data. So when you do cite sources, you really want it to look like, this might be a little bit overcool, but it really should look like a full bibliographical citing, where you've got the full URL to a report, if that's what you're quoting data from, or a newspaper article or a magazine or an industry journal. Where is it that data is coming from so that other people can then find it. They might even want to find that information and use it for business purposes. They may want to double check your data, but you want to make sure that they can actually find that data pretty easily. This is a really good example. This is a tree map of the budget from the BBC called the BBC-ogram, and they did one step better, which is down in the sources. Not only did they cite their sources, but they included a link to a publicly available Google spreadsheet, which has all the data that anybody can go and copy and paste and visualize themselves or double check. And being that super transparent with their data just makes their credibility is so much higher and just jumps over that credibility hurdle instantly, so that people are actually talking about the topic and not about questioning the data. Number 8, I'll say, is be brief. You want to minimize text as much as possible because you want your design to be simple and easy to understand. And your audience is looking for an infographic, not for an article. So these are examples of infographics where a whole bunch of text has been pasted in there. And it almost looks like someone took a blog post or an article, saved it as a JPEG image, and then called it an infographic. But there's not a whole lot of graphic to it. So if we take this first one as an example, your audience, like I said earlier, is going to see this in a blog post or in a social media post, and they're going to look at all that text, and they have to make that decision. Am I going to invest as much time as it takes to read through all that? Is that really going to be quick and easy for me to understand this topic, or should I just move on and try and find something else? And in this case, there's so much text, I think you would just go on and find something else, because there's just so much text here, and people aren't coming to infographics to read a whole bunch of text. They want to see a clear example, particularly visually, usually in a chart, of simplifying complex information so that you can understand the top level or the high level understanding of that topic, and then you can dive deep if you want to. But this, when you look at it, even before you start reading, it just looks complicated and is something that you're not going to want to invest your time in. So what you want, you're not going to be able to get rid of all of it. You're going to want a good balance between visuals and text. So in this case, this infographic about design principles has good icons and illustrations that have been created for each principle, and they have not even a full sentence, it's a fragment of a sentence description about each one. And there have been textbooks and classes all about design principles. So there's obviously a whole lot of rich, detailed information behind each of these, but that's not what's included in the infographic. The infographic is giving you that simple, easy to understand, top level view. And then if you want to go find more information, you can dive in other data sources to go find more information about any of these. All right, tip number 9 is be protected. And that's really about copyright law more than anything else. And infographics have a unique advantage, is that when people post infographics online, they want people to share them, right? So unlike, say, a professional photographer, where they're going to watermark everything and they don't want you sharing their photos because that's their livelihood, infographics online are generally marketing tools like advertisements, and you want people to be sharing those as broadly and as widely and as often as possible. So nobody gets upset if somebody's sharing your infographic. However, for copyright purposes, there is such a thing as infographic theft. And what I mean by this is an example of an infographic on the science of happiness over on the left. And it was designed by this company called WebPageFX and published online. But what they found later was that the second company had taken their infographic and put their own logo on top of it and then republished it as their own. And so that's infographic theft, and where somebody's modifying your design or taking credit for your design and publishing it. And then your only recourse to protect your design and actually keep your name on the design is copyright law. And so you need to make a choice between copyright and sometimes even a better choice would be Creative Commons when you release an infographic. And it's something that you internal to your company ought to have a quick conversation about, as to how protected and how much control you want to have over that infographic once you release it publicly. When you talk about copyright, there are 3 levels of copyright. If you don't do anything and don't put anything on your photo, like this first one I've got here as an example, the US gives you automatic copyright protection. It's the lowest level of copyright protection, but if you can prove that you're the author, or you are the photographer, or you are the original designer, and that you were the one that published it, you can prove based on what date you published it, all these things, then you actually do have copyright protection. The second level is what I call an explicit copyright, meaning you're actually going to put the phrase copyrighted 2010 by Randy Krum or whatever year, or your company. By just putting that phrase on there, you are staking your claim. You are saying, this is mine, this is the date we copyrighted it, and we own all copyrights to this infographic. This is probably the most common way that people copyright infographics online. The third one, and it's pretty rare for infographics, but certainly more used in photography and written works, which is actually registering and filing your design with the US Copyright Office. It gives you the most protection, but it also costs you some money and a lot of time to submit it and take care of that. The alternative is Creative Commons. Now, Creative Commons is meant for works that are going to be shared publicly to make it very clear what you're allowing people to do. It's also a form of copyright. So this is building on US copyright laws, this thing called Creative Commons, which actually has international recognition. So in a Creative Commons license, you get to choose a couple things about what you're going to allow people to do with your design, and then put that onto your infographic itself. So for example, you can choose attribution, which is what this first icon is, where it says by. It says anybody who shares this must provide attribution. They must mention where it came from. You can even make it so that they are supposed to link back to your website. You need to make a choice of, are you going to allow other people to use it for commercial purposes? In this case, you see the slash through the $sign. All right, and that means, and the NC means non-commercial use, meaning you allow your infographic to be used as long as people aren't using it, say, in an advertisement or in a publication for commercial use. And then the last one, ND, means no derivative works. That equal sign means they must share it without any changes whatsoever. You're not allowing them to make tweaks to the graphics or add their own logo or anything like that. They can only share it if they share it intact the way it was originally published. So you would create those choices on the left side on the Creative Commons site. It would create this little license plate, this little license image that you would then include in your infographic. And then number 10, you want to be connected. You want to make sure that any infographic you publish gets connected back to you, the designer, or you, the company that's publishing the infographic. Like I said, these infographics, when you release them, are going to have a life of their own. People are going to share them without any other text that you may have published with it. So anything that's connecting this infographic to your company has to be in the infographic itself. For example, you want to include a URL. In this case, it's a long URL, but you want the URL of where people can find the original infographic. Most people that share, especially in social media, that share an infographic online, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Pinterest, generally do it without linking or including a link back to your original infographic page on your company site. So you need to include in text in that infographic image the URL where people can go and find the original. Generally, that original is the full-size version that you published, compared to, say, a smaller thumb-size version that they may see on somebody's blog or in social media. And you really want to include that in the infographic. So we talk about like the anatomy of an infographic. No matter where you design it, no matter what design tool you're using, we want to put all these tips together and show how they all fit together. So this is basically the outline of a standard infographic, no matter what the topic is, no matter what the data is. You want to start with some sort of engaging title. You see the three-part story that has some sort of introduction, the main visual focus, which is your insight or data point that you're trying to communicate, some sort of conclusion or call to action. The visual we made sure is accurate and is actually visualizing the data, so it's not in text. And then down near the bottom, we have a logo so that we know what company the design came from. We have a URL to get back to that infographic on the company site so that people can find the original. There are links to all the data sources, and there's some sort of copyright or the Creative Commons license at the bottom. And this is generally the outline of what a good infographic looks like that you can then fill in with your own data, right? You should have your own title and your own data and your own call to action. But these are all the elements that you want to include when you design an infographic or when you have a designer design an infographic for you. So a couple things to wrap up, and then we'll open it to questions. You can go to my site, coolinfographics.com/book, if you want to download and sample the first chapter of the book. It's free to download as a PDF. I have a website or a group on LinkedIn that's whole purpose is discussing the craft of designing data visualizations and infographics. And everybody is welcome to join. I think we have close to 1,300 members now. So feel free to join the group. post a question, answer questions, or just lurk and read the questions that other people have asked and answered. This month, specifically because we're doing this webinar with Visme, we're running a giveaway. So you can register on the Cool Infographics site this month up until November 30th. We're going to have a drawing for 1 year of the full premium account of Visme that lets you try out all of Visme's bells and whistles for a full year. So feel free to register for that. And Payman, if you're available, I don't know if you want to talk to, we have a discount code for anybody who's ready to sign up and register for a subscription of Visme that'll give you 30% off the price of a subscription at Visme. If you use the discount code DATA30, DATA30 will get you 30% off any subscription on the Visme website. And then I will open it up to questions unless, Payman, you wanted to add anything to that.
No, actually, thank you, Randy. The code is that was provided for you is right on the screen, so you can use that anytime, DATA30, and also that $192 value, which is a 1 year of the Visme Premium plan. You can also take advantage of, it's a one-time giveaway we're giving, which is one account. And so any of you can go ahead and actually register there. And if you're lucky enough, you win that lottery. All right. So with that said, I'd like to open it up to questions at this time. I wanted to, before I started questions, there was a chat item that had come in about halfway through, about 23 minutes through. I cannot recall exactly what slide we were on, but there was a site that you had mentioned, and Mr. Mohammed Jubayr had asked, and can you please repeat that? I guess maybe the best case would be is, do you remember any URLs you mentioned about halfway? If you want to mention those, repeat that. That would be great.
That's a good question. There were a handful of them, but I don't remember one that would have been specifically mentioned. So maybe Mohammed can tell us which topic he was looking for the URL.
He mentions that it may have started with a GRA, so I guess graph, something graph.
Let me look.
Okay.
I'll look.
All right. So now going on to the questions. The first question was from Shaya. She is asking, can you show how you would have designed the last chart? And there was a chart that you showed where it was Instagram versus Twitter. You want to provide some guidance on that?
So this one, I'm guessing, is what she meant, where it was all in data. It was also in text. Where in this case, I would want to visualize all these, because there's a significant difference between 1.4 billion and only 40 million. Even a simple clean bar chart would easily show and give your audience the perspective of how much larger, how huge Facebook is compared to these other social media services. This would be a great one also for size circles, where you put the logo of each company within the circle, and you could size the circles to match all the differences. But really give them some instant context as to these are the huge social media sites versus the small social media sites.
Great. So the next question was from Raul asking, how can one find out which data can be represented in infographics? For example, I have some data or information, but I find it difficult to decide which information can be represented in an infographic form. Any suggestions or tips for that?
That's an interesting question. I guess I'm wondering if that means from what data you're allowed to use versus which data is easier or better to visualize. There's one thing where, if you're using internal company information, it might be survey data or your own sales data or your website data, that I find a lot of times we end up going through an internal review to make sure that that data can be released publicly when we include it in an infographic. I also find a lot of people may buy market research reports. You might go spend $600 on a market research report and then try to turn around and use that data as a publicly released infographic, which in general would violate the terms and conditions of that research report you bought, because they're trying to keep that information closed and confidential, which is why they're selling it. So there's a choice of, if it's public data, that's fine. If it's internal data, you need to make sure it's something that you are allowed to release publicly. If the question was more towards choosing which data to put in an infographic, because generally you have more information than you need, that would be a different topic. So I go back to, we start the process with what's our key message? What's the primary topic or the primary thing we're trying to convey in that 5-second rule? In the first 5 seconds, somebody looks at your infographic. And we basically start cutting away any data that clutters the design or doesn't directly support that key message. We're not just trying to demonstrate an infographic, hey, we have all this data. It's we're actually have found an insight or an interesting nugget or something we want to share, and we want to make sure that only the data that helps tell that story is included in the infographic, and we cut everything else out. And that also helps keep the infographic design itself clean and simple and quick and easy to read.
So the next question, thank you, Randy. The next question is the copyright examples look very similar for explicit and registered copy marks. Is there a way to tell which is registered, and is there a legal difference if the copyright is violated?
Yeah, so 2 questions here. Let me jump to that. So the 3 images I had here for copyright. The second 2 look the same, where it's the same C in the circle, date, and who copyrighted it. So when you see those online, you can't tell if it's just an explicit claim or if it's actually been registered. You can go to, I believe, actually, I take that back. I think there's actually a circle R, which we use for trademarks. So if you're doing a trademark, a TM is what's called the explicit claim. There's no registration. You can put a TM after everything and simply assert your control over a trademark. But a circle R is when you've actually gone through the process of registering it with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. In copyright, I don't believe there's a separate symbol for the registered version. So you don't know the difference as a reader as looking at between the 2. However, the registered version is a lot stronger if you feel that you're going to need to go to court and defend your copyright. I've never seen that happen for infographics where someone had to take it to court and defend copyright infringement or challenge copyright infringement. But a registered claim is a much stronger position to be in if you're taking something to court.
Thank you, Randy. Another question is from Jamie. She is asking, if the Wall Street Journal publishes an article based on a study or finding, do I need to contact the Wall Street Journal, the researchers who conducted the study, or both if I want to include the findings in an infographic?
So I would go almost like Wikipedia, right? So I would want to go to the original people who released the study. If it's information that they've published on a university page or somewhere else where you can get to it publicly, then unless there are some other terms and conditions on that page, we assume it's got that inherent copyright, right? So written material has that automatic copyright. And so you have to give them attribution for their work if you're going to include it in your infographic. And if you're going to include your infographic in something for commercial use, if you're going to put it in a book and then sell that book, if you're going to put it into a training course and then sell that training course, those are commercial uses. And so you would have to get their written permission to use it for commercial purposes. But if you were just designing an infographic online where it's not being sold or not being used as part of an advertisement to sell a product, then you would just, like the automatic copyright, you would just have to give them attribution and not change it, right? So you need to make sure that you actually quote the data correctly and give them credit for it.
All right, thank you, Randy. Another one, do you have any good examples of charts depicting all the companies in the market that also shows where they overlap? For example, since Venn diagrams don't really work once you have more than X number of categories or brands.
I do, but not where I could readily pull them up. A lot of people will use like a mind map to show, or a network map to show connections between categories, in between companies. There's a great design that's called the Conversation Prism. If you've ever seen that before, I believe it's at theconversationprism.com, where it shows something like 20 or 30 different categories of websites and lists by showing logos, the top companies in each of those site categories, whether it's blogging or videos or photo sharing or Q&A sites. but does a good job. It doesn't show overlaps, though. It may show the same company in a couple different sections, but doesn't show an overlap like a Venn diagram would. So I would do something more like a network map where it would connect to a few different categories.
All right, thank you, Randy. I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. Blanca is asking, how or where can you get a good idea for an infographic? What are your sources of inspiration?
So as far as topic selection, that's a great question. You want the topic of an infographic to be certainly related to your company's business. So the keywords that people use to find your infographic, you want them to be similar to the keywords people use to find your products and services. That way, traffic to an infographic helps your overall website gain credibility and Google PageRank and all that other stuff. So generally, we will go to a company site and do a keyword search and just basically do an audit and figure out what keywords is this company already known for and doing really well in search engine results, and which keywords are they not doing well, but they would like to be doing better for? Like which categories would they like to be ranking higher? And that's usually the best place for us to go find a topic for an infographic that uses those keywords that a company wants to be ranking on but currently isn't, because we can drive more traffic to the site and drive more links based on those keywords to that company site. So that's usually where we start. What kind of interesting things can we come up with, in those topic areas where the company wants more traffic? The other thing I'll mention that we do is what I call a prior art search. So once we have a general idea of some topics, we go out and take a look and see what other infographics have already been published on those topics. Because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to do an infographic that's already been done. And there are thousands and thousands of infographics out there. Mostly poor designs and some really good designs. But we want to make sure that if there was an infographic out there that got a whole bunch of traction on exactly the same topic, people aren't going to want to share a second infographic that's on that exact same topic as well. So we'll do a prior art survey, try and find a niche that has not been covered before so that we're actually doing something new.
Great. Let's make for the very last question. This one is, can you explain again the structure of an infographic? I do recall there was a slide that you showed that very nicely depicted the format and the structure. Can you, yeah, there we go.
So this is how it all fits together, just real quickly. So you want to start with a title that tells very explicitly, don't be subtle about it, very explicitly, here's what the infographic's about, and why you'd want to read it, and that way you appeal to the audience that you're trying to reach. Your three-part story structurally fits generally top to bottom, so that you start with introduction. There might even be charts and data visualizations in the introduction, but it's basically, here's the data you need to understand as background before we reveal the big data, the whole point of the infographic to you in the main visual in the center. And then now that they've seen that, now that you've given them ideally this new piece of information that they didn't have before, lead them to your conclusion or call to action. What is it they should do now that they've learned this new information? Should they, like I said, vote a certain way, buy a certain product, go to a website, eat healthier, get some more exercise, whatever the topic is for the infographic. And then the footer, you want to make sure that there are a handful of things so that readers can find you, the company. So you want to include your logo and make sure you've clearly identified that this whole topic, this whole infographic is related to your company. And the URL of where can they go find this topic or this infographic or even more information on your website. In the infographic, it's got to be in text, but in this infographic itself, so that everybody who shares this infographic, no matter where it is, people can come back and find your site. Links to the data sources, and then an explicit copyright or Creative Commons at the bottom, just to be very clear what you're allowing people to do with the infographic. And then the content, all that stuff in the middle, that's fair game. You can do whatever you want in that. But these are certainly the basics and the structure of an infographic that you want to include.
Well, Randy, I think that's about time. We've gone about an hour. I know there's a few other questions, but we won't be able to answer all of those. And it's been a great informative session. I hope that the audience enjoyed it. I did a quick poll as far as what everybody thought about the webinar, and 83% said it was very informative. They'd like to attend another one, and 17% said it was okay. They were not sure if they will attend, and 0% said it's not so great. So I guess this will be, we can safely say this was a great webinar, informative, and most of you enjoyed it. And me and Randy hope that most of your questions have been answered. And just to kind of recap again, Randy, can you go back to that slide where we can talk about and show the giveaway URL and a discount code? There we go. So there is a URL. It's coolinfographics.com/ it's actually giveaways. Just to confirm that, you got to put an S at the end of the giveaway. I noticed that wasn't going to the right URL. Someone complained about it. I did go ahead and add that into the chat as well. So you can actually go to that. Just put an S. It's giveaways, plural. And then additionally, just to recap here, the discount code is DATA30. It actually ends before end of this month, so make sure you take advantage of it. That's 30% off of any of our plans. And as I stated earlier in our webinar, we are going to be launching really, really major upgrade of Visme in the coming near future. So we'll basically keep our users in the newsletter and our existing users in the loop, and then announce that in our blog. So we're very excited about it. It's been a long, 6-7 months of work. And we're excited about it. And also, additionally, so far, a lot of our webinars have been really not so much about how you can create your content in Visme. So we're going to be doing some additional sessions in the future where me or one of my colleagues will get in and really show you what Visme can do, and you can actually visualize content or even create presentations using that. So on behalf of me and Randy, it's been great having you here. Randy, if you want to provide any last words before we close the session.
I want to thank everybody for coming. I'll throw up on here my contact information. So if there were any questions you either want to add on to or we didn't get a chance to cover, you can get me on Twitter or just send me an email at the email address here on the screen. Thank you very much, Payman.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to go ahead, keep the session open for just a moment. As far as the webinar, there's a couple questions that came in as far as giving the URL again. I will provide that in the chat. And also, we will see you again. Thank you very much.